And I just appreciate everybody. I know my audience pretty well, and I know y'all are fighters, and I know that y'all are into bettering yourselves, bettering those around you. And so I love that we can come together like this and encourage one another. And it's great to see your faces. Those of y'all who have your cameras turned on, it's great to be able to see some human faces, right? Like, so this is really, that
Yeah.
was why I wanted to do this. This is a user defenders community thing that we do generally, but I was like, this is a great way to invite everyone in from the community, just especially during this weird time. Like, we need each other, right? Like, I mean, I always say let's get better together because we're better together. And so I'm just glad you all are here, and I'm so excited that Catalina is here to walk us through her. This is two parts, by the way. This is
Yep.
part one today, and then part two is exactly 1 week from today. So be sure, if you haven't already, be sure you're registered at userdefenders.com/event. That will get you the registration link for the next event. And there will be a video for this, FYI. So I'll be sending that out as well. I know some of y'all may have to take off early, and so don't worry. I hope you stay the whole time, but if you can't, there will be a video to you. So I feel like I need to introduce you really quick. See, so uh, where do I begin? Like, you are a part of the user defenders community, and that's how we really got to know each other a lot more. And
Yeah.
you're a fan of agile and design systems, as it says on your website, and you've really become an expert in design systems. And so
Yeah.
that's why I was like, like, this would be such a great opportunity for you to share your knowledge. And you gave, I think, both of these talks at a UX event. What was it?
Yeah, so the first one, actually, this one happened last year for the first time. It was more local, and then I had the webinar as well. And then I actually got to go to Seattle not week, year, for Convey UX. So
Oh, nice.
under very weird circumstances when COVID was starting and people were going on lockdown, I was actually on the airplane going towards Convey UX. It was very, very weird experience, to be honest with you, because I love mingling, and I had to like Lysol everything around and keep away from people. And I even remember people lining up at the end of my talk, coming and talking to me, and I was like, stay away from me, I don't want to talk too close to you. So it was a
Yeah.
good experience though, but not the first time presenting those talks. I love design systems. Um, and I actually got into design systems a couple of years ago after I had the chance to listen to Brad Frost talking about design system at an event in Cleveland. That was like eye-opening and super inspiring. And since then, I've been like listening to his talks. Him and Dan Moll, honestly, are like the coolest people to follow, really, when it comes to design systems. So yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome. All right. Well, everybody, again, welcome to this awesome time, this presentation, this training. And Catalina, take it away.
Awesome, thanks. Let's see. I am new to Zoom, so bear with me. I'm sharing my desktop. Okay. Max, give me a sec. I need to
No worries.
allow things first to access my screen.
Yeah, no problem. It's
Okay.
interesting how Zoom has really, like, I almost wish I had invested before all
Yeah.
this happened, because I mean, this is how we communicate now a lot. I mean, my kids are on Zoom doing their classrooms. I'm sure a lot of y'all can relate to that as well. So,
Skype for me. Skype and
okay.
Teams. I wish I was using Zoom, but it's just it is what it is, I guess. Cool. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep. See some
Awesome.
thumbs up.
Cool.
Nice.
Great. So, hello, Ohio people. I'm actually located in Cleveland. We've been dealing with some really crappy weather lately. Today is the first day with sun. I'm a senior user experience at PNC. I'm from Romania originally, and not a lot to say about my background. I actually started in graphic design, moved towards web design, and moved into UX, and now just working my way up there. And then in my free time, just to keep myself sane from work and everything that happens, I like to partner with developers and just make ideas happen and bring them to life. Um, either developers or product owners or anyone really that has the bandwidth and the time to work on freelance projects and do some really cool stuff that you might not have the opportunity to at work. So that's it about me. Let's just start diving in. So in terms of what we'll cover, just as Jason mentioned, next week we will have a more comprehensive part 2 design systems. So this one in particular, I would maybe call it a crash course. So if you're new to design system, this is perfect. If you have a little more experience and if you're looking at integrating your design systems in your workflow and the developer experience side of things, that is what we'll be focusing on next week. So now part of what we will be discussing is what is a design system and just a brief history, how long they've been around for, where to begin when you start building your system, identifying whether you even need a design system because you might not and the style guide might be just fine and that's totally okay with it. Who's your audience and who are your stakeholders, how to build a system in terms of components, tools, some process, and then takeaways and next steps. So part of this presentation and what I used to do years ago, I also created surveys in regard to what design systems components are and pain points. So you'll be able to see some data as we're moving through this. So part of history of design system, they've been around for quite some time. And when we talk about design systems, don't think about it just in terms of programming or in terms of computation design tool, but think about it from back in the day when people used to put books together. So book design was a craft, and although they weren't focused as much on design, they were focused on readability. So they did have system back in the day, for instance, movable type to put things together and make book design and book crafting a lot more efficient. And then throughout the time we moved towards computers and Sketchpad and the art of programming and the first programming languages. And if we look at today, design systems are way more than what they used to be. They are growing. I'm actually interested, I don't know if anyone has any experience in terms of design system, artificial intelligence, voice interface. I'm very new to that area, but I'm conducting research and I'm open to learn as much as possible from that perspective as well. But if we look at design system today, it's beyond pattern libraries, beyond Brad Frost atomic design, and even material design from Google. We start thinking a lot more in modular terms and enterprise-wide. You also see Airbnb over here because I found some really cool articles a couple of years ago to how they build, in regard to how they build their design system when it comes to different platforms. So whether you are building this design system for iOS desktop, or even Android, or even VR, honestly, they are using one and the same design system, but they do have that middle layer, the component library, which renders the UI on all the different devices. So instead of having different sources of truth, they actually create a single source of truth that just essentially dumps all that UI. So this is the data that I was talking about in terms of me talking to, I want to say roughly 100 UX designers and developers, different UX maturity level, different experience level as well. So some of the questions were focused on whether people have a design system defined or not, how do they manage the governance around the design system and who owns that. And when I asked people how they own a design system, that was a tricky question. And I think that was the time when I was able to see the disconnect between development and UX, which happens quite often, and most of us know about it. But luckily, 43% of the people still said that is a group effort. So the other question that I asked the group is if they know what a design system team is and how many people were actually able to be part of a design system at some point, or if they are. So obviously, as a design system will grow and will become more prominent in the organization and more solid, probably your team might not have the time to focus on the design system. So that's the time when you're going probably to need a team that is dedicated to it. So that dedicated team will be the one planning for it, maintaining it, and growing it. So When I asked the audience, most of them actually knew about design system teams, but very few were actually able to be part of it. So if we look at the definition of design system, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you have a set of defined things that helps the organization and supports your current initiatives. And more important, and I think the thing that everybody needs to know, and also a selling point when you're going through a buy-in phase, is that it goes through different maturity phases, and it's very similar with the software development lifecycle. So you are going to iterate and ideate, and you're going to launch it, and you have to maintain it because it's going to be a living document. So when we talk about design system, it's not just a library of things, or it's not just a style guide. Those can be components or aspects of the design system. So you're going to have the design system principles, and I will have a few examples for you in a few slides. You have the common language for elements, which also goes into the developer experience side of things, and we will be covering more the developer experience and what that is and how you can make it better next week. You obviously have guidelines from the UX perspective. Some of those guidelines might even touch on some of the workflows. The corporate style guide that existed even before probably we were part of the organization. Pattern library with code, that is what developers are maintaining and taking care of. And also you can have, I run across people that have communication mediums as part of the design system, like how we are communicating about the design system, how do we maintain it, do we have like a ticket system, or how do we take care of it. So I have another pie chart which is supposed to show up. Here it is. So when I ask people in terms of components and what their design system have, I don't know if this is good or bad news for the UXers, but most of design system have code. Like that's one of the most important things. And you have design patterns, which are obviously created by multiple design tokens that you're going to have in your system. You do have style guides. Some people consider their mocks as part of your design system, wireframes as well. So it really depends. And I think one of the key takeaways that you will understand at the end of this presentation is that there's not a fixed recipe when it comes to design system. Like you can listen and do the research, but just like with everything else, try to adapt and take what makes sense for your company. So for instance, if for your company it's enough just to have a pattern library with code, then that is more than enough. But if you are more mature in the organization, and if you have like more complex products, then maybe for that particular scenario, you are going to need more elements to it. So where to begin? We talked about the history of systems, what is a system, some of the components that will be part of it, but how do you actually start putting a design system together? So obviously identify a problem, you know that there is a problem. That's what led to the design system in the beginning. When is the best time to implement a design system, and who are going to be the people consuming that system? Obviously preparing for the buy-in from the stakeholders by documenting the current state, defining the principles, so that one will be very important as you're moving on and as your system will be growing as well. Defining the methods and the methods of communication and tools. This is actually really funny. So first time when I presented this in Cleveland, when I talked about tools and when I showed the slides with tools, I think everyone in the room, most people in the room, ended up pulling out their notebook, and they started writing down all the tools that I came up with. And I want you to know that it's not always about tools. It's mostly about how do you develop that communication through a design handoff and with the stakeholders. And obviously also establishing a minimum viable design system, because you're not going to be able to solve for everything at once. So how do you run a beta pilot before investing in it so much? And how do you actually get the buy-in, and how much time do you want to invest in it? And then obviously once you're past through those stages, iterating and improving is also crucial, because otherwise the design system and the momentum itself is going to die. So we'll actually be talking through almost each one of those things and cover what we need to do. So identify the problem. those are the problems that essentially led to design systems. We deal with applications from early 2000s. We have a bunch of accessibility issues. If depending on your company, like you might need to be AA or AAA compliant or single A, right? And with the design system, you can actually address those accessibility issues, because as you're bringing that practice at your organization, um, in those design elements that you're recreating and accessibility issues that you're addressing, those can make it to the design system, and accessibility will be already built in within your system. Obviously, people are spending more time writing code and a lot of duplicated code, and that actually ends up leading to a lot of tech debt, lack of process when it comes to design handoff, and just kind of throwing our designs over the fence and just waiting to see our work in production. And then obviously lack of communication and collaboration. So when it comes to tackling this down, one of the most important things is to think about the audience and the key stakeholders, and who's going to be the user and who is going to benefit mostly from this design system. So you're going to have the external users, which obviously are the users of the organization and people that are actually benefiting and using your applications. And then you have the internal users, which are going to be the people that will work with the system on a daily basis and interact with it at different levels. So that is a matter of developers, right, implementing our designs, QA when they're writing their test scripts, managers and associate managers. Those people are important in as far as getting buy-in, but I don't know if they would necessarily be using your system. Product managers and product owner for writing requirements, and if you're looking at roadmap and upcoming things, and us, UX UI team. So the point is, when we are building the design system, don't build it only from your perspective. Don't think that just because a mock or a style guide makes sense to you and it's easy for you to read that, don't think that for a developer it might be the same way for them to interpret your design, because that's how you're going to be ending up with inconsistencies, and you're going to end up seeing completely different designs implemented at the end of production. So one of the things that I asked throughout the surveys and interviews, I asked people about their size of the UX team. And this is important, and we'll be talking about this more next week. It goes back to the maturity of the UX team. So obviously, if you do have a larger UX team, it means that your organization is fully sold on it. But if you have 1 or 3 people in the team, it might be a little more difficult to put a design system in the beginning, because maybe your organization doesn't fully see the value of UX at the moment. So you will have different battles to focus on. So I can't wait to share more about that next week. I'm not going to say more about it now. But when it comes to dev involvement, that is also important as well. We talk about developer experience, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this term. Typically, people refer to this in terms of when they read open sources or any type of APIs that might exist out there through Git. So it is that, but it goes beyond that as well. And I think it goes back to the state when we do the design handoff. And when we do the design handoff, again, it goes back to how do we do it in a way that they understand what we are trying to convey through our design and what we are asking them to do. So I asked people how often they involve developers in their brainstorming sessions, and it's not a lot. It's only 33%. I think that's a fairly small percentage, and I think as a UXer we can do a better job. So I think a lot of UX designers are minimizing the effort and the job that a developer has. Like they're beyond code implementers. And if you end up having code design sessions together and brainstorming sessions, it's beautiful, because by the time you are going towards design handoff, you're not going to experience pushback as much. So when it comes to design system, they do have a seat at the table, and it is important to understand what makes sense for them and how it can help them implement our designs better. So it's not only towards their benefit, but it's our benefit, it's the external user at the end of the day. So A design system has different stages. I didn't mention the minimum viable design system. So think about that one as a pre-system for efficiency. So when you're already at the stage for system for efficiency, that is a time where you already got the buy-in. And when you're building the system for efficiency in the beginning, you have to focus on your team, like internal, like how can your team be more efficient internally, and you're going to be focusing more on the output. You're not going to be focusing as much on the consistency at this stage because the design system is pretty young. You're updating some of the components. Also, when we talk about buy-in, don't do the mistake I did years ago to talk about the consistency as being a primary sell point, because it's not. Um, if you're updating old technology and UI, you'll actually end up creating more inconsistencies for the short-term run. So I'm actually learning now that accessibility is a bigger sell point, again, especially if your organization is AA or any type of compliance level that you can think of. Um, that is very important because if you don't follow those regulations, you might get a lawsuit. And that is bad for your organization and bad for your team and everyone. So it's the easiest to sell it through that aspect of things. But once you're past the system for efficiency, you can start focusing on consistency. So your system at this stage is already pretty robust. You start focusing more on ROI and you have a clear alignment between the teams. And by this stage, you also have all of the tools figured out. And then once that is put together, you're thinking about how you can optimize the system and maintain it, adapt it throughout the time. You know, technology is going to be changing, so hopefully the next 10 years, you're not going to have to go through the same thing all over again because you did take care of the design system, you maintained it, and you adapted with every single feature or, I don't know, every other application that might come into your organization. So when we talk about design system pain points, I think it's only one point, and the main aspect of things that people don't get it. Like they don't see it as a problem because again, we go back to, oh, consistency. We talk about consistency. And even when I started at my organization, one of the biggest things I did is I interviewed every single stakeholder, and I asked them like, hey, what do you see in UX? How can UX help you? And their answer was constantly consistency. And that sometimes tells me that the organization might not fully understand what we can bring on the table. So if you do bring up just consistency, and if they don't see that happening right away, then the design system might fall through the cracks. So obviously, lack of awareness, not being a priority, no buy-in, adoption. It's difficult to maintain because it is not on the roadmap or it's not being seen as a priority. Budget, same thing. It is not seen as a priority right now. So how do we make it a priority for our organization? You start out like, let's see how we can get ready for the buy-in time. So you have to document the current state, and you can document the current state through two different perspectives. One is short-term, and then one is long-term purposes. So for short-term, for you just to get the quick buy-in, putting that agile mindset on, do a quick interface inventory. So this is what I learned from Brad Frost years ago. Just go through your application, pick one single design element, token, however you want to call it, take a bunch of screenshots, put them together, put it in front of your organization, and that can prove the point of consistency. But in terms of accessibility also, it comes out through usability testing. When you recruit your participants, you can try to find those participants that might have accessibility issues. So call these things out early enough, and then after that, you can start thinking about the long-term purpose of the design system, and you can run heuristic evaluation and call out bigger problems that can be solved. So this is a quote that I found years ago, but people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So when you sell your design system, think about why do you need a design system in the first place, and call those problems out and how can the system fix it. So in terms of getting buy-in, you do need leadership buy-in. This is going to be tough, and I think everyone can have a role and a seat at the table, no matter where are you in your career. So if you're starting out fresh, you can work with product owners. But if you're in a leadership role, you can talk to director managers. Find those bodies across your organization, like the people that really understand your meaning and your purpose, and that are just as passionate about those things as you are. And those people are going to be your defenders, no pun intended, Jason, or your soldiers as you're moving along. And obviously call out accessibility and consistency, any type of tech debt, even line up with architects from this perspective. And um, just by working with them and helping them understand the purpose of this too, and if they come on board also, then that's an easier win. The other thing is enterprise. I think with time, UX enterprise gets bigger and bigger. So a lot of the organization think in terms of enterprise, and for those who don't, um, getting buy-in from that perspective, it is important as well. So you can sell the design system. So instead of having an organization, I don't know, I'm trying to not use a name over here as much as I can, but let's say you have an organization that has multiple products, and then they don't understand the value of the entire organization as a whole. They just see it individual. You do need to have that enterprise alignment, because when you're building your design system, you're not going to build a design system for a single product. You're going to build it with the organization. So think about it from a modular perspective, also architecture. And then I think more importantly, people are afraid to invest in things that are expensive before really understanding if it's valuable or if it's going to work or not. So what I found valuable throughout the time is it's really helpful to either run a beta or pilot by using a minimum viable design system. So there's two different approaches to this. Either you grab a single component and let's say a button, and then you work with a developer and you create the class and the style sheet and the variables for the colors. And then on your side of things, you just design the look and feel and any type of guidelines you might want to run with. And then you can run the beta pilot with that. And then if you have that one developer that is really passionate about those things, they can start implementing those and just create a quick pilot in front of everyone and help them understand how fast and easy it is to implement those things. The other option is look at the roadmap and see if you can identify any type of project that's coming down through the pipeline, and then with that project, look at any type of UI components that that project might need. So work through those components and start collaborating with the developer, and from that perspective, start building the code and prep for it. So there's two different approaches. The first one might be simpler with a single design token. And then obviously after that, you can measure success to proof concept. Success can be measured through several different ways, whether it's time spent coding versus time spent correcting in post huddles, and even QA, right? It's easier for QA. Let's say if they are doing something that is going to impact the interface, the way it looks, or I don't know, maybe for some reason you have animations, those things can be tested out, and then QA knows what to expect from their perspective when they're testing those things out, rather than just testing it and they don't care. And then again, we have designs that don't align with our original concept into production. So this is another important one, and I think a lot of people don't think about it. They just kind of go straight to the UI side of things. So every single design system has principles. Every single company has principles that they run by. So design principles must support that product and even company ethos. And here's everyone has to come together, not just UX. Like you are going to have developers, you're probably going to have people from the leadership perspective. Also, the time when you are defining your principle is after you got the buy-in. So this is already step one for building a robust system. Then it has to work with the company's values and the product vision. And then with time, it is normal, like with everything else, for those for those principles to evolve and change. So I have a few examples. Jason, I'm sorry, I have no idea how to move that window, and I'm afraid I'm going to close something. But these are some examples from Android design system principles. So I really like it because they are written from the user's perspective, and I thought that's kind of clever. So let me make it mine. Like, I love that one. People love to add personal touches because it helps them feel at home and in control. Get to know me, learn people's preference over time, rather than asking them to make the same choices over and over, place previous choices within easy research. So it goes back into analytics and data and how do we want to tackle those problems. Keep it brief, give user hints, but let them have the final say. So those are really, really nice. And I always go back to them because you define the principles not in a corporate way where it says, let's make the user experience better. Like, they're not vague, they're still clear, and they still provide guidelines and guidance on how we want to do things. And I can't recall if it's Medium or what organization, and maybe I shouldn't have used this as an example, but I know someone out there, and I think is Medium, but I might be wrong. And if someone knows this, drop it in the chat and we'll talk after. I know there's one of the companies that has, as a design system principle, one of them says, we care more about user experience over consistency. So don't try to push consistency in situations where it doesn't make sense. So just be aware of those use cases and try to adapt and change things based on the use cases rather than allowing the design system to dictate everything. Let's talk about tools. There's a lot of them out there, and it depends on what you're doing. So like DSM, it's pretty popular. It's one of the things by InVision. It's super easy. It's integrated with Sketch. I'm pretty sure it might be integrated with Photoshop as well. It is only for Mac users. So at some point in my life, I actually thought about creating a competitive analysis because it would be easier for people to pick. But it's really tough because it's a matter of operating system. I think it's a matter of computer. So like some of the things are only supported for Macs because for some reason there is this type of idea that designers only work on Macs. I used to work on Windows. I switched to Macs. Sometimes they're a pain point. Lightning Design System. So Lightning Design System, it's great, especially if you're using products from Salesforce, like their CRM and things like that. You do have out-of-the-box components that are easy enough to use. Pattern Lab, that is one of the ones from Brad Frost that he came up with, and with him having background in development, it's pretty easy to use, and it's successful so far. Adele is another one, and I'm not sure which one is the one that incorporates with Figma, but I know same how DSM has the partnership with Sketch, I know Figma has something, and I don't know if it's Adele or not, I can't recall it right now, but there's a bunch of different things out there that can help build your system. So you can have those things where there are people that just create a website from scratch, or just use that website with a component library, and then you're good to go. In terms of development, Jason, you're covering React Native, but React Native, it's one popular language that people are using right now. Bootstrap, obviously, it came out also during the user interviews. So in terms of tech stack and backend tools that can help developers be more successful, it's also important UX to be part of this conversation, not necessarily for UX to decide what works best, but just for us to share with developers what is our plan and where do we want UX as practice to move on. So maybe you decide that tomorrow you want to start building animations in your application. So you have to make sure that the framework you're using is going to be able to support that, and the technology is not too old. And I've been in situations when the technology was too old to do something that is really cool in 2020. And obviously in terms of icons, you can build them from scratch, but there's a lot of different websites and tools out there that give you predefined icons that you can use. So you don't have to rework and make your life more difficult than it has to be. So here is, actually did ask the audience what they think in terms of design system and what tools they are. Most people talk about tools like InVision. There is NPM also used to manage, I think, Java or yeah, or JavaScript. Sorry, I know we have devs in the talk in the in here, but I know JavaScript is very different than Java, but I can't recall what NPM does because I didn't use it myself. Git is pretty popular as well. Bootstrap, I was actually surprised through the research to see that people are not relying on Bootstrap as much. I would love to dive in and understand why. But Sketch is pretty popular, and when we talk about InVision, we can talk about the InVision Inspect tool that comes with it, very similar to Zeppelin, or the DSM that is provided by InVision. So you made it. Let's say you built your system, but how do you know it's actually successful? Obviously, you look at the adoption and utilization of the design system, and you can figure that out based on, I don't know, production. Like you're seeing the final work, and you either realize if things were updated in terms of accessibility and consistency or not. You can also build analytics. I was actually just reading an article the other day that you can build analytics into the design system to see how often things are being accessed in the system, and you'll understand whether some components are more used or not. And if they are not, then it's either time to assess why they are not used. Maybe it's just not valid with the use case that currently exists in the application. And with the help from product owner, you can look at ROI and things like project cost and timeline. And in order to measure success, I think it's really important to understand the before and after. So when you start building your design system, as I mentioned, when you pair up with those bodies and those people that you're working with, um, ask people to tell you, hey, how much did we spend on this last project, and measure it against that, and that's how you can actually start building your case studies. And feedback loops, I think we can definitely use some of our UX research methods. So user interviews, like just sit and talk to developers. Are they happy with it? Is it easier for them to use things and build things? You can send out surveys, observational learnings, even to see how they use it, or even product owners in terms of how they write the requirements, and does the information architecture make sense for them? Is it easier to find things on the page, and other things like that. So takeaways, I don't know how we are on time, but this is the last thing. So bridging communication between departments, that is going to be a big talk for next week, as well as having a common language when we talk about the developer experience side of things. Simplifying process versus complicating it. So again, when you build your system, don't build it in a way that it makes sense for you and then just force your internal users to use it in a way that it might not make sense for them. Don't stun your creativity. So for instance, again, don't let just consistency and standards stop you from coming up with something better. If you can come up with something better, let's test it, and then that way you can put it into the system. Create a seamless user experience. This sounds like, now that I read it, sounds like a corporate value and standard, you know, like let's make UX great again. Library of elements is not enough, so don't just create a component library. You might need more for all the different audiences that we'll be focusing on. Keep it transparent, so don't hide it. Don't just keep it under lock, oh, this is UX or this is development. Also think modular and think about it at the enterprise level, not for a single product. Again, don't let the tool and the system define your requirements. So if you do have new use cases, and if you need to adjust things, that is normal. It is a living document, and it is going to change with time. Don't build it for a particular platform. So when you pick your language for the backend and the way you're building things, let's say that one day your company decides to go mobile or build a mobile app. It's much easier to think about it long term rather than building for something and then you have to rebuild it or create a second system. And last but not least, make it fun and usable for everyone, not just you. And that's all I had. Have a bunch of different resources. I can send these ones out to people. Really good stuff.
All right, awesome. That was amazing, Catalina. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us and that great presentation. I learned a lot. I was taking a lot of notes, and a lot of folks interested in the slideshow. I do want to mention there will be the video available after, so I will be emailing it to all of y'all that have registered. So be on the lookout for that. And yeah, a lot of kudos. See on your presentation today. So that's awesome. And there will be another one next week, that part 2. So definitely don't miss that, and register at userdefenders.com/events. We do have time for Q&A. So I definitely want to open it up to y'all, to feel free to unmute yourself and ask C a question.
I do see something in the chat. It's a long one. Should I, Jason,
Oh
how do
yeah.
you want to approach this? Should people ask the
Uh,
question or go through the chat first?
let's do the live questions first, and then we'll do the chat ones after.
Cool.
So I'll kick it off. I got a question. I'll kick it off here. Uh, what you mentioned design debt in your presentation, and I think a lot of us are familiar with technical debt, but what is design debt, and how does a design system help reduce that?
Yeah, cool. So again, like taking the example, early 2000 development and early 2000 applications, you're going, I think when we talk about design debt, it goes back to accessibility, but it also goes back to not being consistent. So number one is accessibility, the way things are being built. Obviously, different screen sizes when you're going through one screen to another one, um, working out between iframes and double scrolling and making things impossible for our users. But other than that, it's also because you didn't have a standard across the organization. When you are building things, um, they're never the same. So not only the things that are built are outdated, they're not the same. And again, we talked about organization not thinking about it from an enterprise perspective. So you think about it from, this is my product, this is my application, and then this is yours. But it doesn't matter if we're in the same organization, because this product owner is concerned only about their product. So the developer from that team, it is going to build things however think it makes sense for them, because that is dictated by the product owner. So it goes back to accessibility. It goes back to, it is tied to tech debt actually as well. Switching to different languages, and you start building things in something else, and then they render differently. The things that render differently on different browsers as well. But also thinking about it in terms of modular experience rather than product.
Awesome. Let's see. Yeah, if anybody has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask C a question. This is a great
Jason,
opportunity to learn more and
J-
get some more insight. Yeah.
Jason, this is Joe.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, quick question. How can you take a design system and marry it to, say, the data or research that's done, whether it's from a usability test or data from tracking? How can those two be married so that you can create a design system that supports data and supports what you're trying to achieve in terms of the best or the optimal experience?
This is a fantastic question, and I'm gonna cover it next week.
All right, I
um,
guess I'll have to show up for next week then.
yeah, I can respond to it really quick. So
Don't spoil
it
it. I
goes.
don't have to.
I'm not gonna spoil it. It
Tease
goes
it.
back to your team maturity as well, and whether you have a dedicated UX research or not. Or if you are a generalist and you're running usability tests constantly, then it will be a little more difficult to do that. But if you do have UX research as a standard practice in the organization, then that data, as you're testing designs and elements that make it into the design system. Obviously, if the feedback is negative, if you do A/B testing, one component will make it to the system versus another one. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, so it's the practice in the organization, but it's also if you don't have it as a practice, when you do create new components and new standards, you do test those things out, and as you test those things out, they make it to the system or they need to be improved. And I'm actually touching on that exact process flow next week.
Great. Thank you for the answer,
Awesome.
Catalina.
That's great. I love that. There's a lot of anticipation for next week's session, so that's
Yeah, I
really
can't
great.
help.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, you got to give them a reason to come back, right? So, but yeah, I mean, you did, this was incredible. There's some more questions here. This is a really quite a long one. I'll just read it real quick. Somebody asked, how would you handle the situation if your company had a design system, but this system is evolving from time to time? The applications that were developed in the previous version of the design system use the old design system components. Therefore, the consistency is pretty bad. So there's different calls to actions there. How would you convince stakeholders, POs, that applications need to be maintained under the influence of a changing design system and that old components need to be replaced again? Wow.
Okay, so Airbnb, and I have that as one of the resources. I will give everyone access to the PDF. I will just have to clean up the animations, obviously, but um, there's a talk from Airbnb, and the one of the UX lead, and I don't even know if he's like part of lead for the design system team. He was sharing the idea of one design system and improved versions of the design system rather than multiple versions of the design system, because that's dangerous. If you say version 1 design system, version 2, then people will say, well, we don't have time to focus on version 2. So that way, just try to focus on one, if that makes sense. And then I guess like in terms of people not wanting to improve things, number one, try to find a developer that definitely has interest. I don't know if you work in a company that slaps your hand if you do things, but if you don't, then just start working with them together. I hope there's an open mentality that allows you to do those things. And if that doesn't work either, then you have to go back to the buy-in phase and see what you missed there. And sell it in terms of accessibility. Think about it that way. Do you need to be ADA compliant? Just you can pull out that card that you might be sued even as an organization. So yeah, just something to
That's
be aware
great.
of.
That's great. Great answer and interesting question for sure. Another one, what is the best way to start pitching to leadership who will fund the MVDS, the minimum viable design system? What would you include in the first high level overview?
So in terms of funding, I think whenever I've done it, nobody funded anything. We just kind of started doing it. Again, like I was finding, I think even in my previous role and even in the current role, find that one person that is willing to do this. And most likely, if they're willing to do something outside of their job and their job description, then they're super passionate about this. And if they're passionate about this, their management is great as well and supports their passion. So nobody's going to slap the hand of those people. So you can start working together. And I gave in the presentation two different examples about how you can pitch it. You can even start out with a design token, whether that's a button or headers like textiles, something as simple as that. Or the other option is look at, and again, like this goes back to UX team maturity, whether you have visibility on the roadmap or not. But if you do, and if you know about any projects coming up soon, and hopefully if you're not involved mid-sprint, you can start planning for those things ahead of time. Like if you have a project that will need primary and secondary call to actions and will need to display um, some table data, then start focusing on those. And start focusing on those at a high level, because you can drive yourself crazy by thinking about it. Well, table data, like you can have filters and you can have sorting, and what about column width, and what about accessibility and tabular view and all of those things. So think about it big picture. Like that's the most important thing, because otherwise you're going to be scaring yourself, and your audience to. Baby steps.
That's great advice. Jidhesh asked if, I don't know if you're still here, Jidhesh, but you asked about how do we tackle multiple platforms like iOS and web. I wonder, are you talking about in the context of some of these tools that that Catalina mentioned?
I
I'm not
think
No,
sure. Oh, there he is.
not really. So sorry. Thanks, Catalina. Really
sure.
great presentation. What I was coming after, I worked in organization which have not chosen to use a single platform like React Native and address everything, because, for example, there are benefits on performance on Swift and Android
Yeah.
native stuff. And the teams themselves, because these platforms have their own design system in a way, like, iOS is a design system. Now, how do you try to combine them for a smaller organization that's trying to deliver solutions that are multi-platform?
Yeah.
And yeah,
It's a tough question. And I don't have enough developer background to be able to fully answer to this, but there is an article that I found on HackerMoon, and it's about what Airbnb did. So I am pretty sure, and I hate like sharing this, but I'm pretty sure they use React Native. So
yeah.
sadly, number one, it is the language of your component library that you're going to be ending up using.
So, Catalina, I was not asking more from a tech point of view, because that's a different problem to solve. But from a design team point of view, from a product
Okay.
management and a design team point of view, because where I'm getting at is like, let's say you have a certain pattern. Let's say it's a form, for example, and you
Mm-hmm.
want to fill in something to for a credit card payment, let's say. Now you got a design established and you're saying that, hey, this is the spec on it, and you got code components, everything on a web platform. And when it comes to iOS or Android, some of these, the way they
Right.
tackle form validation or save, cancel, etc., completely different, and trying to enforce
Yeah.
one pattern on another, the users will be completely lost. So how
Yeah.
do you design and maintain a system in terms of the spec of such kind of variations in a design system?
Yeah, so I've seen those type of apps. Like I've seen apps that are using native material design, and then I've seen apps that are using iOS design system. And those are like the bigger organizations that can afford to, I think, um, maintain multiple design system and multiple libraries. Um, Personally, I've never been in that situation before where I had to be concerned on multiple applications. There is only one thing that though I found myself in this situation when on my free time I am building applications and I'm trying to collaborate. So when we were building out the application, I had to get a developer and get budget from my own pocket. So I have to think about it. Okay, do I do Android or iOS, because I can't afford both? And then the other thing we were thinking is, um, in terms of like design, I can't afford to spend so much time on designing two different UIs for iOS and Android. And obviously there are users that are more used with one than another one. So you either, I think I ended up personally, I ended up going with Android because I'm used with Android as a mobile user. But if I were to pick again and go back, the developer that we were working with, I think it still goes back to the type of language that you're using, because it can translate those components out of the box, like out of the box material design without customizing it or like branding it or anything like that. So you can use those things, or you end up creating a close enough hybrid for both iOS and Android. So I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know how I can respond better to this, because to be honest with you, I personally never had to do it. I had to do it on my own time, but never officially within the organization.
Thanks, Catalina. That's all right. It's been a hard problem. I even reached out to Carrie Seinen from Airbnb. He's also
That's
struggling with the
awesome.
same problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one, but I would love to connect with you. And if you ever find an article or anything that can even help me learn more in that area, I'm open to it because it's a tough one. And I actually had
Sure,
this as
sure.
an interview question once.
Thanks. Sure.
Yep.
Jitesh, your assignment before next week is to find the answer and to share it with all of us
Yeah.
next week.
I
That's
can I
great.
can
Great.
share my experience from 3 companies if you want.
Right on, man. That's a great question. I really appreciate that. There's one more quick one. I know we have about a minute left. So this is an interesting one. It's more tool specific, Catalina. So if it's Adobe XD, so if you don't have a lot of experience with XD, that's fine. But this person asked, I'm very new to UX. I'm still just starting to learn. I'm learning Adobe XD. How does my choice of XD affect design systems that I might work with or develop in the future? Are there limits or conflicts?
Okay. So you want to look, I guess number one is, do you mean design system in general or design system at your organization? Because I think you can have the theory of what design systems are and how to build them, but when it comes to tools, I think it's a variable for each company. When I know like there are tools that are integrated with one another, so I don't know if XD has integration with Envision. I don't know, but I know like Sketch, Photoshop, they have plugins with Zeppelin, and they have Sketch is obviously in partnership with Design System Manager. So I'm assuming XD does have something like that. I just personally never worked with it. So I can, but I know you can build a design system specifically using Adobe XD because I remember seeing a course on LinkedIn a couple of days ago. So you might actually have something built in. You might not even have, because their software platform is pretty big. So I don't know if they necessarily need to have partnership.
Yeah, yeah, and Joe just responded as well that there's that XD does have plugins similar to Sketch,
Yeah.
so they opened that up recently. So there's probably something in there as well. So we're at the end of our time. Defenders, thanks for being here again. Please register for next week, part 2. This was great, and it's going to get even better. So I'm excited. Catalina, thank you again for being here today,
Awesome.
for your time. I put your website on the chat. Is there anything else you want to tell us, like how we can connect with you, another way that you'd like us to connect with you?
I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. On Twitter, I have no idea. I was since 2019, but now I became active. My first name R, and then my last name, and then on LinkedIn just my first name and my last name. And send me an invite.
Awesome.
We can connect and talk. And you guys send me resources. I send you resources, and we grow together.
Wonderful. Thank you, Catalina. Thank you, Defenders.
Thank
And
you.
we will see you next week. And until then, stay safe and fight on, my friends.
Thanks, Jason. Talk to you later. Thank you, everyone.